Recording. So if you press on these two links, you'll see that you've got a download that you can do. And this is these are Python codes. You don't need to write the code because I wrote it for you, all right? So I'm not asking you to write Python code today. We got plenty of time for that. What I want you to do is I want you to get that Python code. Now, if you double click on it, what will happen is the program will start running. Now, what I've done, normally if you try and run one of these programs, it will disappear on you. But what I've done is I put it in an unending loop. It's in and so we'll look at the code in a while and we'll see that, right? So we've got it in an unending loop. And so what we do, oh, this one, wrong one. I don't want to do the decimal to binary yet. That's a harder one. Let's start with the easier one, reverse name. So I'm going to download that one. And it's an easier one. And when it runs, it has, so notice how it starts. It says, enter done to quit. So that tells you that we got a loop, but it's a, what kind of loop? There's two kinds of loops, right? There's a counted loop, and the other one is the sentinel loop. Sentinel is like the soldier who's standing at the castle, at the gate, let them in or out. So we got a sentinel loop. If the person types done, then the program will end. Now, I haven't done anything fancy with it. I didn't do the lower or upper thing, which you've seen before in a code. So this is stuff you've seen. But when I do done, that goes away, right? So the program ends as soon as a person types done. But if they don't type done, then the program will continue in an unending loop, right? So we'll look at that unending loop in a minute. So if you type a name, so I'll just type my name because it's one name that I can kind of remember easily. I typed the name in two parts. I got the first name and the last name, because what I'm going to do with the name is I'm going to put the two parts of the name together with a space between them. That's normally how we write our name, right? Put the two names. So that would be string concatenation. Remember that? So nothing so far I've told you is new, right? What I'm doing is I'm trying to remind you of stuff, right? So I'm going to do the string concatenation, and hey, the program goes and runs. But notice at the bottom here, it says enter done. So that's the loop. That's the loop, and there's the sentinel. It can keep going. Down there at the very bottom, it asks you to put another name. But let's look what happened here. It looks like, oh, we got two things going on here. What it actually does at the end is it reverses the name completely, right? So you see, take from the last character of the name through to the first character of the name, including the space. And this one does the same. But if I look at the way that the stuff that happened in the meantime, they're kind of a little bit different, right? This one here starts with the N, then the NE, then the N. All right, this one here starts with the M. So this one is starting at the front of the name and adding to the left. So you see that the front of the name just keeps getting pushed over to the right. And what gets added to the left of it is the next character that would have been on the right. Instead of going on the right, it's going on the left. And so that's how we reverse the name there. With this one, we actually start at the right side of the name, and we add to the right, but we're taking the characters from the next one furthest right, next one furthest right, until we end up with that. So this was done with two different functions. Now, that's our last topic that we got to learn about in this course is functions. Now, you have seen functions, right? We did this in class. We're doing it again. So there's nothing I'm doing here that I haven't shown you. I'm just showing it to you in a bigger example. The other thing that we've got going there is pretty obvious, I hope. I got a bunch of print statements in there that, you know, they're, how will I say it? They're probably, in order to do the reverse of the name, you didn't need these print statements in there. They're there to show you how it happens. I wanted you to see what happens, right? So we see how that actually works by putting the print statements in there. I do that a lot. That's an alternative to tracing once you've actually written the program. All right, so I could keep doing this with a shorter name, so it's more obvious what's going on. I keep doing that forever until I get a done, right? When I get done, I am done. and sort of goes away. So we've got this program. It's going to be, if you've done this, it'll be sitting in your downloads folder. And so there's our program there. If you right click and then edit with idle, you'll see the program in the way that we normally look at it. And we can then see, I hope, what's going on. Right. So when we do a program in idle Python, which includes some functions, then we have to use this way of doing it. So the DEF, that tells you that we're creating a function. DEF is short, I guess, or that's the way that I read it, for define, because we define a function. So with a function, there's two different things that have to happen. First, we have to define the function, and then we have to call the function, right? Now, this was in your test, so I assume that we've talked about it before, correct? So, and maybe you've even looked at it from some on your own, we hope. So where we see the DEFs, that's where we're defining functions. We're defining two different functions with two different names, but there's something similar about those two functions. They both have this thing in the round brackets. Now, the thing in the round brackets at the end of the function name, that's called a parameter, or according to your test that you did, another name, and these two things mean the same thing. We could also call it an argument. It's an argument or a parameter. So the argument or the parameter is input into the function. So here's two functions. They require the same input, and the input that they require is the name that they're going to reverse. And if we look at the end of the function, we see in these two particular functions, and this doesn't have to happen. You don't always have to have an input for a function. That was actually a quick test on the quiz test question, right? You don't have to have an input, but you can. You don't have to have an output, but you can. Okay, now in this case, they do have an output. The output, we know we've got an output from a function when we see the word return at the end of the function or somewhere in the function. If we have a return in the function, that means that we're outputting. And what are we outputting? Well, the thing that we have computed here. We're going to both of these output a reverse. Well, reverse, you can look here and you can see what kind of variable reverse is by the fact that it has the two exclamation marks. That means that it must be a string. That's how we do strings. So just looking at that, you say, reverse is a string. Reverse is going to be returned out of this function. Two things I mentioned a second ago. Functions, there's two parts to working with a function. First, we define the function. Here we're defining it. Then the function won't do anything until we call the function. When we call the function, that's when these things become particularly important. When we call the function, we're going to have to call it and pass a parameter to it. When we call it, we'll have to say, if there's a parameter specified, when we call it, we'll have to mention that parameter. But we can use a different name. And the other thing is, if the function has a return value, then we have to mention that as well. And how we do that is we say, we create a new variable. We say this variable is equal to that function. And that's how we return the value out of the function. All right, so here we're defining them. The program doesn't start here. This is just to define the functions so they're ready to go when they are called. Two-step process with a function, right? First we define a function, then we call it. All right, so here I put in a little red comment, the main. That is to tell me, to tell you, whoever's looking at this program, that this is where the program actually starts. Starts here in the main. These functions, that's not where the program starts. The program will go there when there's a call, but not until. So this is where the program starts, while true. I told you a minute ago that way this program works is, keeps going forever. Look at the condition of the while statement. The condition is just while true. While true what? Well, that's our way of saying, just go forever. You know, just be true and go. So that loop is going to go forever. But we do have a circuit breaker. And there you can see it. It's even got a name, break. It's kind of like a circuit breaker. I mean, we can get out of this. We can break. So That's what we're going to do here. But notice that the break is in an if statement. So we got a condition. And the condition that we put on that is if the person puts a name of done, which is what we've instructed them to do, if they put the name of done, then they break. And what break will do is end the loop. Break is just to get out of the loop, get out. Whatever loop I'm in, I'm going to get out when I do a break. Yeah, let's look at it. All right, so what's the point? The first thing that we do inside our loop is we ask the person for a first name. Then we check that first name to see if it's done. If it's done, we're done. Right? Anytime the person types done, we're done. Now, if they don't type down, then we move on to the next lines of code. So after we've asked them for the first name, we ask them for the next name. Right? So we got two variables, which are string variables, which contain names, strings, names. Then what do is we create a new variable, which is a string variable, and it takes the value of those two strings with a space between them. This is where we insert a space between the two names and put the two names together. This is called concatenation. Remember that? That was on your test. So there we're doing a bit of concatenation. Now here, this is where we get to our functions, right? Right here is, if you see that, hopefully you recognize that somewhere right there. It says reverse your name, and then it's got in brackets full name. Full name is here. This is a variable. It becomes here a parameter or an argument. Whatever the value is, this is going to come as an input into this function. This is the name of this function up here at the top. Here we call it name, but here we've called it full name. That doesn't matter. We can use different. We probably should use different so we don't get confused in the program. So here we're saying we've created this global variable, full name, and we're going to pass it into as input into the function called reverse name. Now, the other thing that's happening with that function is it's returning a value. We know it's returning a value because when we called the function, we use an equal sign. So that means that we're assigning the value of what happens in this function to a variable called backward. That's what's happening there. We're assigning the value of what happens in this function is the returned value. So whatever reverse is, when we're finished this function, is now going to be the same as backward. And then we can print it. And so that's what we do there. Now, so what's happening in there? When we get to this point, we call this function. We pass in the full name, comes in as the name. The first thing that happens in that function is it gets a counter variable that we call I. I is a number, and I is an integer number, which is the length of the name minus 1. Now, why do we do that? So let's say the name is, I got Sue Bo there, right? So that's going to be passed in. So, first name was Sue, last name was Bo, right? They came in as first and last. Then we added them together to get this. That's passed in as the function. What's going to happen with the len is it's going to count this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Len of Subo is going to be, well, this is going to be full name or something like that. Len of name, in this case, is going to be equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's going to be equal to 6. Now, the problem is that the way this string is we've got an index on that string. And we can see every individual character in that string by its index. But the index starts with the number 0. That's how we do it in computing with indexes, with lists, strings, stuff like that. We use a 0. So this is position 0. This is position 1. This is position 2. These are not values. These are indexes. You got it? It's not a value. I'm not saying this is a number is 0. I'm saying this is position 0, which is the first position. It's kind of weird, but that's how we do it in computing. And so this is position 3. This is position 4. This is position 5. Now notice the length of that string is 6 characters, but the biggest position is 5. That's because we started counting with 0. So that's why we say, what is the length of that string? Oh, it's 6. Take 1 away from 6, and that'll be the position at the end of the string. Got it? That's why we're doing the -1. We're saying, okay, how big is that string? That's what this says. How big is that string? Take away 1 from how big it is. It's 6. Then it gives me position 5. I'm going to start at position 5. I'm going to start right here on that string. I'm going to use the I as an index to work through the string. So I tells me where I am in the string. Now, I create a new variable, which is a string variable. We know it's a string variable because it's got the 2 quotes. Okay, and so what are we going to do? We're going to go into a loop as long as I is bigger than or equal to 0. So I at the moment is 6, and we're going to keep doing a whole lot of stuff until it becomes 0 or bigger than 0, right? Well, when it gets to 0, we stop. So we're going to do well, it's not 6. Sorry, I is 5. We're going to do something with it until it gets to 0. Correct? Sorry, I is 5. Because if the length was 6 minus 1, that's 5. So as long as I is bigger than or equal to 0, we're going to do something. Well, what are we going to do? There's some new stuff there that's a little different. So focus on that at the moment. We got plus equal. Plus equal is a way of saving some time. So we don't have to write a lot of stuff, but it's a way of saying, whatever this variable is, add this thing to the end of that. Plus equal means take this and add it to the end of that. Does that make sense? So we're saying take this plus equal that. Whatever this is, add that to it. That's all plus equal means. We can do it with numbers. We can do it with strings. So we're saying, so what we're saying is reverse at the moment is empty. We're going to take a character from the name at the position, and our position is 5. We're going to add it to that. Well, what's the character here? We're going to take O. We're going to add, so we got a string like this. We're going to add an O to it. So the string now is going to be O. Got it? Which is the last character in that person's name. So that's what's going to happen there. Then we're going to, now what happens is it's a kind of a similar thing, right? Except it starts with, it's a minus equal. So instead of adding this thing to this, we're going to subtract that thing from that. So this is at the moment 5. We're going to subtract this from it. So it's going to become 4. I is now 4. Right? And so then we're going to print it. And we do that until we get to the end. Now, I'm actually going to change this code. I'm going to put in a little bit more on the print. I think what I should do is I should print the, I'm going to take the I minus 1. I'm going to put it after this. So it's the last thing that happens. And I'm going to print not just the reverse, but I'm going to print the I. So there's my reverse. Going to put a plus in there because we got strings. We can use plus to add strings together. So that's what we're doing. This is one string. Reverse is a variable that holds a string. We're going to add to it another string, which is going to be the I value. So this is a string, but it's just something for us to read, right? Then the I value is not a string. It's an integer, so I have to convert it to a string. So I convert it to a string with the str, and so that will show me what's happening to the I when I run my program. So I'm going to run it again. All right, so let's do it with Sue Bo because her name is shorter than my name. And let's see what happened. So what happened is I started out as 5, just as I said, right? I starts out as the value 5, the 5th, which is the end of the name Sue Bo. And we add O to the end of the string. Then the next time through the loop, I becomes 4 because of this, 5, 4, it's going to keep going until it gets to 0, right? Eventually I becomes 0. And what happens every time it goes through there, it adds another character to the end. Get it? And then at the end, we've got this thing which is printed out. Yes, Jim.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is I.
I. You see that? I tried to make that clear.
And so it's always going to be I, right?
This is I. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I mean, this is reversed.
Yeah. I mean, like in the function, is it always I?
Yes. I is a local variable. Remember, you saw that in the test, right? Local global variable. I is a local variable. It's created inside the function. It's only accessible inside the function. Can't be used outside the function. This is so I starts out as whatever the length of the name is, minus 1. And it goes down to 0. When we get out of the function, I goes away. You know, that place in the memory is, it's only there as long as the function is running. So that's what's happening there. Can you see it? Hope you can see it. Now this stuff down here, that's the other function. We can talk about that in a minute. But you okay with this one now?
But still, bigger than or equal to 0, why did we go?
Because look, because of our index. If we tried to have an index position of minus 1, the computer will give us an error. I promise you that. Let's do it. Let's check. Let's change this from I is bigger than or equal to 0 to I is bigger than or yeah, let's say bigger than or equal to minus 20. You will get a 0, an error. Oh, let's close it. So unless you're, yeah, you'll get an error. Why do we get an error? Because we're trying to, when we get to these things here, I'm amazed that it went as far as minus 6. When we get into these things here, you can't really work with them. I'm surprised.
So it depends on the letter of the name.
The number is the position in the string. The number is the position in the string.
So it's gonna reach like the last letter.
Yeah, when it gets to here, it's run out, error. Minus are errors. They don't exist. I don't know how it came up there. That's a weird thing that I'm not explaining here at the moment. But yeah, so when we got into this territory, it did the name again. So it treated the negatives as if they were positives. Very, very interesting. All right, so we'll keep that as equal to 0. All right, so I want you to understand this. Let's focus on one thing at a time, reverse name. Can we, and I'm going to stop the recording at the moment because we're going to do some stuff on the board, but can we understand this function? When we've understood it perfectly, we'll go and look at the next function. People said this was hard, so I want to focus on one function at a time until you understand it. All right, we got 2 weeks for you to understand all this stuff. That's my goal, you understanding it. Maybe that'll happen today, maybe it'll happen next lesson, but it's going to happen, right? Okay, because it has to happen because this is what we need for the exam. So I'm going to stop recording now.
So when it comes to the depth functions,